Imagine a world carved up by giants. In the 6th century BCE, the Near East was a chessboard dominated by 3 titans: the Median Empire, the fabulously wealthy kingdom of Lydia, and the ancient, sprawling Babylonian Empire. Beneath their shadow, a small mountainous kingdom paid them tribute: Persia. To the great powers, the Persians were little more than hardy shepherds and horsemen, a minor piece on the board. They couldn't have imagined that from these rugged hills, a storm was gathering, one that would sweep them all away and reshape the known world. This storm had a name: Cyrus. He wasn't born into supreme power. According to legend, his own grandfather, the Median king, tried to have him killed as a baby because of a terrifying prophecy. But fate, or perhaps the sheer force of his will, had other plans. Raised by a shepherd, Cyrus grew up with the grit of the common man and the vision of a king. He saw the disunity among the Iranian peoples, the Persians and the Medes, not as a weakness, but as an untapped strength. He was charismatic, a brilliant strategist, and possessed a revolutionary idea. Cyrus didn't just want to conquer, he wanted to unite. He rallied the Persian tribes who were tired of being second-class citizens. His first target was the one closest to home, his own grandfather's Median Empire. In a stunning turn of events, the Median army, weary of their own king's tyranny, defected to Cyrus. He didn't just seize the throne. He merged the 2 peoples, Persians and Medes, into a single powerful entity. He took the Median capital, Esarhaddon, but he didn't raze it. Instead, he made it one of his own. The shepherd boy had become a king, and his kingdom was now a force to be reckoned with. With the Medes and Persians united under his banner, Cyrus turned his gaze west toward the glittering prize of Anatolia, the Lydian kingdom. Lydia was ruled by King Croesus, a man whose name was synonymous with wealth. Croesus, feeling threatened by this upstart Persian, consulted the famed oracle at Delphi. The oracle gave him a typically cryptic answer: "If you cross the river, you will destroy a great empire." Confident this meant his own victory, Croesus marched his army across the Halys River to meet Cyrus. The clash was titanic. The first battle was a brutal stalemate, but Cyrus was no ordinary general. Knowing Croesus would disband his army for the winter, Cyrus did the unthinkable. He marched his own forces through the harsh Anatolian winter, appearing unexpectedly before the Lydian capital, Sardis. In the decisive battle, Cyrus deployed a masterstroke of psychological warfare. He placed his camels at the front of his army. The Lydian cavalry horses, terrified by the unfamiliar sight and smell of the camels, panicked and fled, throwing the entire Lydian army into chaos. Sardis fell, and Croesus was captured. The great empire he destroyed, as the oracle predicted, was his own. Cyrus had just absorbed one of the world's richest kingdoms. Now, only one giant remained: the mighty Neo-Babylonian Empire. Babylon was more than a city. It was the heart of civilization, a sprawling metropolis of legendary walls and hanging gardens steeped in millennia of history and culture. Its king, Nabonidus, was an unpopular ruler, more interested in his religious devotions than in governing or leading his army. The people of Babylon, especially the powerful priesthood of Marduk, the city's chief god, were resentful. They saw Cyrus not as a conqueror, but as a potential liberator. The conquest of Babylon wasn't a long, bloody siege. It was a strategic marvel. Cyrus's army advanced, and city after city opened its gates to him. When he reached the great city itself in 539 BCE, Babylonian resistance crumbled. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Cyrus's engineers diverted the flow of the Euphrates River, which ran through the city, lowering the water level enough for his soldiers to wade through the riverbed and enter under the massive walls. The gates were opened from within, and Babylon fell almost without a fight. Cyrus entered the city not as a destroyer, but as a liberator, hailed by the people. This is where Cyrus truly became the Great. What he did next was unprecedented. In an age where conquest meant slaughter, enslavement, and destruction, Cyrus chose a different path. He didn't just tolerate the cultures and religions of the peoples he conquered. He actively supported them. He found a tablet, now known as the Cyrus Cylinder, which declared his policy. In it, he announced the restoration of temples and the return of cult statues to their rightful homes. Most famously, he freed the peoples held captive in Babylon, including the Jewish people, who had been exiled from their homeland for decades. He didn't just release them. He issued a decree allowing them to return to Judah and provided funds to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. This act earned him a revered place in the Bible, where he is called a Messiah, an anointed one of God, the only non-Jew to receive such a title. He established a principle that would become the bedrock of the Achaemenid Empire, a multicultural, multi-religious state bound not by force, but by a shared sense of security and respect. From a minor vassal state, Cyrus the Great had forged the largest empire the world had yet seen. It stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River. But his legacy wasn't just in the lands he conquered. It was in the idea he championed, that a ruler could win loyalty through mercy, that an empire could be strong through its diversity, and that greatness is measured not by what you destroy, but by what you build and what you set free. The Shepherd King had not only conquered the world, he had given it a new model for civilization. His story was just the beginning for the Persian Empire, a foundation upon which his successors would build, reaching even greater heights and facing even greater challenges. In our last episode, we witnessed the meteoric rise of Cyrus the Great and the birth of the Achaemenid Empire. Today, we're diving into Part 2, The Empire Forged, a story of ambition, crisis, and a king who carved his legacy into a mountainside. If you're ready for more epic history, let's get started. When Cyrus the Great left this world, he left behind not just a vast empire, but also a son with a monumental legacy to uphold. This was Cambyses II. Imagine being the son of the guy who's already called the Great. The pressure must have been immense. Cambyses knew that to truly step out of his father's shadow, he couldn't just maintain the empire. He had to expand it. And there was one glaring piece missing from the Achaemenid puzzle, one final, great rival of the ancient world that had eluded even Cyrus, the ancient and wealthy kingdom of Egypt. Egypt was no easy target. For millennia, it had been a powerhouse of culture, wealth, and military might, protected by vast deserts and the life-giving Nile. Conquering it would be the ultimate prize, a definitive statement that the Persian Empire was the undisputed superpower of its time. So, Cambyses marshaled his forces, a colossal army drawn from every corner of his diverse empire. He made strategic alliances, even securing the help of Arabian chiefs to guide his army across the treacherous Sinai Desert, a logistical masterpiece in itself. In 525 BC, the Persian and Egyptian armies clashed at the Battle of Pelusium, a city on the eastern edge of the Nile Delta. The battle was fierce, a collision of two ancient worlds. But the Persian military machine, honed by decades of conquest, proved superior. the Egyptian forces were shattered. After the victory, Cambyses marched on, capturing the key city of Memphis and deposing the last native pharaoh of Egypt, Psamtik III. Just like that, the land of the pharaohs, a civilization that had endured for nearly 3,000 years, was now a province of the Achaemenid Empire. Cambyses had done it. He hadn't just matched his father's ambition. He had surpassed it by conquering the unconquerable. With Egypt subdued, Cambyses adopted the traditional titles of the pharaohs, presenting himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as a legitimate successor. He respected their temples and their gods, a continuation of the Achaemenid policy of cultural tolerance that his father had championed. It seemed the empire was more powerful and stable than ever. But history, as we know, is rarely so simple. While Cambyses was consolidating his rule in Egypt, a storm was brewing back in the heartland of Persia. Word reached him of a rebellion, a usurper who had seized the throne. The details are murky, shrouded in the fog of ancient propaganda, but the story goes that a man claiming to be Cambyses' long-lost brother, Bardia, had taken power. Rushing back to Persia to confront this crisis, Cambyses met a sudden and mysterious end. The official account, which we'll discuss in a moment, claims he despaired and took his own life. Other sources suggest an accident, perhaps a self-inflicted wound from his own sword that became infected. Whatever the cause, Cambyses II died in 522 BC, leaving the mightiest empire on earth leaderless and teetering on the brink of civil war. The man claiming to be Bardia now had free reign, and chaos erupted across the provinces. The grand imperial project of Cyrus and Cambyses was about to unravel. This is where our next major character strides onto the stage, a man of noble lineage, a brilliant strategist, and arguably the true architect of the Achaemenid state, Darius. Darius was a distant relative of the royal family and had served as Cambyses' personal spear-bearer. When the king died, Darius saw not just crisis, but opportunity. He, along with 6 other Persian nobles, formed a conspiracy. They claimed the man on the throne was not the real Bardia, but a Magian priest named Gaumata who was impersonating him. According to their story, the real Bardia had been secretly murdered years earlier by Cambyses. Whether this story is true or a brilliant piece of political propaganda is one of history's great debates. What is undeniable is what happened next. Darius and his co-conspirators stormed the palace, killed the usurper Gaumata, and in the ensuing power vacuum, Darius seized the throne for himself. But his claim was tenuous at best. He wasn't the direct heir, and with the empire in turmoil, rebellions flared up everywhere. From Babylonia to Media, from Elam to Armenia, provincial leaders saw their chance to break free from Persian rule. Darius's first year as king wasn't one of feasting and celebration. It was a year of non-stop warfare. He spent the next 12 months crisscrossing the empire, putting down one rebellion after another. In a series of 19 battles, he methodically and ruthlessly crushed all opposition. It was a Herculean task that demonstrated his genius as both a military commander and a leader. He didn't just win. He united the fractured empire under his sole authority, proving that he was more than capable of holding Cyrus's legacy together. But winning the war was only half the battle. Now he had to win the peace and, crucially, convince everyone that he was the rightful king. And for that, he would create one of the most incredible historical documents ever made. To solidify his reign and broadcast his version of events to the world, Darius commissioned a monumental relief and inscription to be carved into a sheer cliff face in modern-day Iran. This is the legendary Behistun inscription. Located along a major ancient trade route, the inscription was carved 100 meters up a limestone cliff, making it visible to all travelers but safe from tampering. It was an ancient billboard for a new king. The inscription itself is a masterpiece of propaganda. It's written in 3 different languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, ensuring that all major linguistic groups in the empire could read his message. The text tells Darius's story from his perspective, of course. It details the usurpation by the false Bardia. Gomata lists the 19 battles he won against the liar kings who rebelled against him, and attributes his success to the grace of the supreme Zoroastrian god, Ahura Mazda. Above the text is a massive relief carving showing Darius, now Darius the Great, standing in triumph. His foot is on the chest of the defeated Gomata, and a line of 9 captured rebel leaders are bound by a rope around their necks, paraded before him. The message was unequivocal: I am the chosen king. I have defeated my enemies, and my rule is sanctioned by divine will. The Behistun inscription is more than just a piece of royal propaganda. It's a linchpin for our understanding of the ancient world. Because it presented the same text in 3 different languages, it became the Rosetta Stone for cuneiform script. In the 19th century, scholars, most notably Sir Henry Rawlinson, risked their lives climbing the cliff face to transcribe the text. By comparing the known Old Persian with the unknown Babylonian and Elamite scripts, they were finally able to decipher the wedge-shaped writing that had been a mystery for centuries. This unlocked the histories of Mesopotamia, Assyria, and Babylon, all thanks to Darius's need to justify his rule. With his claims secured and the rebellions crushed, Darius the Great didn't just restore the empire, he reinvented it. He was the ultimate organizer, the master administrator who would turn a sprawling conquest state into a stable, functioning, and incredibly wealthy empire that would endure for another 2 centuries. He would introduce standardized coinage, build the royal road, and reform the system of governance, creating a model that future empires would emulate. The period following Cambyses' death was a crucible for the Achaemenid Empire. It could have shattered into a dozen warring kingdoms, its brief moment of glory fading into memory. But instead, through the ruthless ambition and administrative genius of Darius the Great, it was forged anew, stronger, and more organized than ever before. He literally carved his right to rule into the side of a mountain, and in doing so, ensured his name and the glory of Persia would echo through eternity. The reign of Darius is a whole epic in itself, and we'll be exploring his incredible reforms and his famous clash with the Greeks. But taking the throne is one thing. Holding on to a colossal, sprawling empire is another challenge entirely. This is where Darius the Great truly earns his title, not just as a conqueror, but as the great organizer, the administrative genius who would transform a vast collection of conquered lands into a cohesive, functioning superpower. So, how do you govern an empire that stretches from the Indus Valley all the way to southeastern Europe? An empire of countless cultures, languages, and traditions? This was the monumental puzzle facing Darius. His solution was nothing short of revolutionary and would become a blueprint for future empires, including the Romans. He introduced the satrapy system. Imagine the empire as a giant chessboard. Darius divided the board into about 20 large provinces, or satrapies. Each satrapy was ruled by a governor called a satrap, which literally means protector of the kingdom. These satraps were often Persian noblemen, but sometimes local elites were allowed to govern, a clever move to ensure regional loyalty. The satrap's job was immense. They collected taxes, administered justice, raised soldiers for the royal army, and maintained order. They were essentially mini-kings in their own right, wielding significant power. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds risky. What's to stop a satrap from getting too powerful and rebelling against the king? Darius was way ahead of you. He was a master of checks and balances. Alongside the satrap in each province, he appointed 2 other key officials who reported directly back to him, not to the satrap. There was a military commander in charge of the local garrison, preventing the satrap from controlling all the military might. And there was a chief financial officer who oversaw the treasury and tax collection, ensuring the king's coffers were always full and that the satrap wasn't skimming off the top. But Darius's masterstroke of control was a network of special agents known as the eyes and ears of the king. These were his personal spies, roving inspectors who traveled throughout the empire unannounced. They would arrive in a satrapy and observe everything: the state of the roads, the mood of the people, the conduct of the officials. They had the authority to investigate any aspect of the local administration and report their findings directly to Darius. This created a powerful deterrent against corruption and rebellion. The satraps knew that at any moment, the king's eyes could be watching, ensuring they governed justly and remained loyal to the crown. It was a sophisticated system of surveillance that kept the massive empire firmly in Darius's grip. With the administrative structure in place, Darius turned his attention to another critical problem: communication. How do you send a message from one end of a 3 million square mile empire to the other in a timely fashion? Before Darius, it could take months for a decree to travel from the capital to a distant province. This was not just inefficient, it was dangerous. A rebellion could break out and rage for weeks before the king even heard about it. Darius's solution was the construction of the famous royal road. This wasn't just a path. It was an ancient superhighway, an engineering marvel that revolutionized travel and communication. The main artery stretched over 1,600 miles, from Susa in the heart of Persia all the way to Sardis near the Aegean coast in modern-day Turkey. But this was just one part of a much larger network of roads connecting the empire's major centers. What made the royal road so effective was its infrastructure. Along its length, at regular intervals of about 15 to 20 miles, were well-maintained way stations or postal relays. Each station had fresh horses, food, and lodging. A royal messenger could ride at full gallop to the next station, swap his tired horse for a fresh one, and continue on his way without delay. It was the Pony Express of the ancient world, but on an imperial scale. The Greek historian Herodotus, who saw the system in action, was deeply impressed. He wrote, "Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds." In fact, that famous line is now the unofficial motto of the United States Postal Service. Thanks to this system, a royal message that once took 3 months to deliver could now cross the empire in about a week. This incredible speed allowed Darius to manage his vast territories with unprecedented efficiency, dispatching orders, receiving intelligence, and moving troops with astonishing quickness. The royal road wasn't just a road. It was the empire's nervous system, binding its disparate parts into a single responsive whole. With his empire organized and connected, Darius embarked on a project that was less about administration and more about ideology. He wanted to build a capital that would not just serve as a seat of government, but as a symbol of the empire's power, grandeur, and, most importantly, its unity. He chose a site in the Persian heartland, a vast terrace nestled at the foot of a mountain, and began the construction of one of antiquity's most breathtaking sites, Persepolis. Persepolis, which means city of the Persians, was not a typical city. It wasn't a bustling commercial hub or a major residential center. It was a ceremonial capital, a grand stage designed for one primary purpose: to showcase the majesty of the Achaemenid king and the unity of his diverse empire. It was a place for receptions, festivals, and ceremonies, particularly the New Year festival of Nowruz, where representatives from every corner of the empire would come to pay tribute to the King of Kings. The architecture itself was a statement. Darius employed the best craftsmen from all over his empire: Lydians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, each bringing their unique skills. The result was a stunning fusion of artistic styles, a physical embodiment of the empire's multicultural identity. The grand staircases, soaring columns topped with bulls and griffins, and vast audience halls were all designed to inspire awe and reverence in any visitor. But the most telling details are found in the magnificent relief carvings that adorn the walls, especially on the grand Apadana staircase. Here, we see a procession of delegations from all the subject nations of the empire, each depicted in their traditional dress and bringing gifts characteristic of their homeland. There are Ethiopians with an elephant tusk, Scythians with horses and bracelets, Indians with gold dust, and Babylonians with textiles and bowls. Crucially, these depictions are not of conquered, humiliated peoples. They are portrayed with dignity and respect. They are not shown as slaves in chains, but as willing participants in the imperial project, walking together in a spirit of cooperation. This was brilliant propaganda. The message was clear. The Persian Empire was not built on brute force alone, but on a partnership of peoples, all united under the benevolent rule of the great king. Persepolis was the stone and mortar expression of Darius's vision, a universal empire, vast and diverse, yet harmonious and unified under one throne. It was the ultimate symbol of the world he had organized. Darius's reforms, the satrapies, the royal road, the standardized currency and weights, and the grand statement of Persepolis created a stable and prosperous empire that would endure for 2 centuries. He was more than a conqueror. He was a visionary statesman who understood that true power lies not just in conquering territory, but in organizing it effectively and winning the loyalty of its people. But this golden age of peace and organization would soon be tested. As Darius looked west towards the fractious and independent city-states of Greece, a clash of civilizations was brewing that would change the course of history forever. Join us next time as the mighty Persian Empire sets its sights on the tiny, defiant states of Athens and Sparta, sparking the legendary Greco-Persian Wars. The Western Storm. We turn our gaze to the empire's turbulent western frontier, where a clash of civilizations would echo through history. Up until now, the Persians had expanded with seemingly unstoppable force. But on the sun-drenched shores of the Aegean Sea, a different kind of people, the Greeks, were building a unique civilization. These weren't a unified empire, but a collection of fiercely independent city-states, or *Poleis*, scattered across the Greek mainland and the coastline of Ionia, which is in modern-day Turkey. For a time, the Ionian Greek cities existed under Persian rule, a relationship that was often tense. They valued their freedom, their democratia and their distinct way of life, which chafed under the centralized control of a distant king. The simmering resentment finally boiled over. Around 499 BC, the Ionian Greek cities, led by Miletus, rose up in a full-scale rebellion against Persian authority. They even managed to sack the local Persian capital, Sardis. This was more than just a minor border skirmish. It was a direct challenge to the might and authority of the King of Kings. The rebels sought help from their mainland cousins, Athens, a rising power, and the small city of Eretria sent ships and soldiers, turning a local revolt into an international incident. For Darius the Great, this was an unforgivable insult. After suppressing the Ionian revolt, which took several years, his anger was squarely focused on Athens and Eretria. He saw them as meddlers who had dared to interfere in his empire's affairs and had aided his rebellious subjects. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, Darius was so incensed that he had a servant repeat the words, "Master, remember the Athenians" to him at every meal, lest he forget his quest for vengeance. The stage was now set for a monumental confrontation. This wasn't just about punishment anymore. It was about securing the empire's western border and demonstrating the consequences of defying Persia. In 490 BC, Darius launched his punitive expedition. A massive Persian fleet sailed across the Aegean, first destroying the city of Eretria to make an example of it. Then, they landed at a wide crescent-shaped bay, a place that would become legendary, Marathon. The Persian force, a mix of infantry and cavalry, vastly outnumbered the Athenian army that marched out to meet them. The Persians were confident. They had conquered kingdoms and toppled empires. What chance did one small city-state stand against them? The Athenian commander, Miltiades, knew a head-on charge against the superior Persian numbers would be suicide. Instead, he devised a brilliant and daring strategy. He intentionally weakened the center of his battle line and heavily reinforced the flanks, the sides of his formation. As the battle began, the Persians, as expected, pushed through the thin Athenian center. It looked like an easy victory was at hand, but this was a trap. As the Persian main body advanced, the strengthened Greek flanks wheeled inward, enveloping the Persian forces on both sides. The Persians, who thought they were winning, suddenly found themselves surrounded and attacked from three directions. Panic set in. Their formations broke, and what followed was a slaughter. The Persians fled back to their ships in disarray, pursued by the victorious Athenians. The Battle of Marathon was a stunning victory for Athens and a shocking defeat for the Persian Empire. It was the first time the seemingly invincible Persian war machine had been decisively beaten by a smaller, less equipped force. The news was so momentous that, according to legend, a runner named Phidippides ran the entire distance from Marathon to Athens, about 26 miles, to announce the victory before collapsing. While the historical details of the run are debated, the story captures the sheer magnitude of the event. For the Greeks, it was a morale-boosting triumph that proved they could stand up to the might of Persia. For Darius, it was a humiliating setback, and the vow to remember the Athenians now burned even hotter. The storm had been weathered, but a much larger one was gathering on the horizon. Darius spent the last years of his reign planning a second, even larger invasion to crush Greece once and for all. However, he passed away before he could launch it, leaving the task of avenging Marathon to his son and successor, Xerxes. Xerxes was a man driven by legacy and honor. He felt compelled to finish what his father had started and erase the stain of Marathon from his family's name. He spent years meticulously planning and amassing an army of unprecedented size, drawing soldiers from every corner of his vast empire. The force Xerxes assembled was, by all ancient accounts, the largest army the world had ever seen. He also built a massive navy to support his land forces. This was not going to be a mere punitive expedition. This was an invasion of conquest designed to absorb all of Greece into the Persian Empire. To get this colossal army from Asia into Europe, Xerxes ordered a remarkable feat of engineering. He had his men build a pontoon bridge of ships across the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating the two continents. He even had a canal dug through a peninsula to avoid the stormy seas that had wrecked a previous Persian fleet. Nothing was left to chance. As this immense force began its slow march into Greece in 480 BC, terror spread throughout the city-states. Many submitted to Xerxes without a fight, believing resistance was futile. But a handful of states, led by the bitter rivals Athens and Sparta, formed a Hellenic league and resolved to fight for their freedom. The first major clash came at a narrow coastal pass called Thermopylae. Here, a small Greek force of a few thousand, famously led by 300 Spartans under their king Leonidas, made their stand. The geography of Thermopylae was their greatest ally. The pass was so narrow that the Persians' vast numerical superiority meant little. They could only attack the Greek line in small waves. For 2 days, the heavily armored Greek hoplites held their ground, repelling wave after wave of Persian assaults. The elite Persian immortals themselves couldn't break the Greek shield wall. Xerxes, watching from his throne, was said to have leapt to his feet in frustration and anger multiple times. But the heroic stand at Thermopylae was ultimately undone by betrayal. A local Greek showed the Persians a hidden mountain path that allowed them to circle around and attack the Greeks from the rear. Realizing they were surrounded and the position was lost, Leonidas dismissed the bulk of the Greek army, choosing to remain with his 300 Spartans and a few hundred other allies to fight to the last man. Their sacrifice was not in vain. They bought the rest of the Greek forces precious time to retreat and prepare for the next battle, and their bravery became an inspirational legend that galvanized Greek resistance. After Thermopylae, the path to central Greece was open, and the Persians marched on Athens, which they found abandoned and subsequently burned to the ground. With Athens in ruins, it seemed like Xerxes was on the verge of total victory. The fate of Greece now hinged on its navy. The brilliant Athenian statesman and general, Themistocles, knew the Greeks couldn't win a conventional battle on the open sea against the larger Persian fleet. He needed to fight in a place where their maneuverability would be an advantage and the Persian numbers would become a liability. He lured the Persian navy into the narrow straits between the island of Salamis and the mainland. Xerxes, confident and eager to crush the last remnants of Greek resistance, took the bait. He even had a throne set up on a nearby hill to watch his fleet's glorious victory. What he witnessed instead was a catastrophe. In the tight confines of the straits, the large, clumsy Persian ships struggled to maneuver. They became disorganized, crashing into each other and creating a massive traffic jam. The smaller, more agile Greek triremes, powered by skilled oarsmen, darted in and out of the chaos. They rammed the Persian vessels, boarded them, and sent them to the bottom of the sea. It was a decisive and devastating victory for the Greeks. The Persian navy was shattered. The Battle of Salamis was the turning point of the war. Without his navy to supply his massive army and protect his lines of communication, Xerxes' position in Greece was untenable. Fearing he might be trapped in Europe if the Greeks destroyed his pontoon bridge at the Hellespont, he retreated with the bulk of his army back to Asia. He left behind a large force under his general, Mardonius, to try and complete the conquest the following year. However, this remaining Persian army was decisively defeated by a combined Greek force at the Battle of Plataea, while the remnants of the Persian navy were destroyed on the same day at the Battle of Mycale. The invasion had failed. The Greco-Persian Wars were a watershed moment in history. For Persia, while a major setback, it wasn't a mortal blow. The empire remained vast and powerful for another 150 years. But it marked the end of their westward expansion. The western storm had been broken. For the Greeks, the victory ushered in a golden age, particularly for Athens. It filled them with an incredible sense of confidence and cultural identity, laying the groundwork for the explosion of philosophy, art, and democracy that would define classical Greece and profoundly shape the future of Western civilization. The clash between the great empire of the East and the small city-states of the West had ended, and its outcome would shape the world for centuries to come. The story of Persia is far from over. We witnessed the dramatic clashes with the Greek city-states, conflicts that reshaped the ancient world. But what happens after the smoke of war clears? Does an empire simply rest on its laurels? Today, in Part 5, we delve into a period often called the Long Peace, an era of relative stability that, paradoxically, was riddled with inner turmoil, palace intrigue, and cracks that began to show in the empire's mighty foundations. After the intense campaigns against Greece, the Achaemenid Empire stepped back from major external conquests. For nearly a century, an era of relative peace descended upon its vast territories. The royal road buzzed with commerce, taxes flowed into the treasury, and the great capitals of Susa, Persepolis, and Ecbatana flourished. On the surface, the empire of Cyrus and Darius was at its zenith, a global superpower enjoying the fruits of its dominion. It seemed as though the King of Kings held the world securely in his grasp. But if you looked closely past the glittering facade of the royal court, you'd see a different story unfolding, one of shadows, whispers, and daggers. While the borders were quiet, the real battles were being fought within the palace walls. The Achaemenid court became a hotbed of intrigue and conspiracy. Power was a high-stakes game, and the players were ruthless. The line of succession was often blurry, leading to fierce rivalries between a king's many sons born to different wives and concubines. Eunuchs, courtiers, and powerful nobles formed factions, whispering plots in dimly lit corridors. Assassination became an all-too-common tool for political advancement. Take the death of Xerxes I, for instance. He wasn't killed on a battlefield, but murdered in his own bed, the victim of a conspiracy led by his most powerful minister, Artabanus. This assassination plunged the empire into chaos. Xerxes' son, Artaxerxes I, had to fight his own brothers to secure the throne he had rightfully inherited. This cycle of violence and mistrust would repeat itself. Decades later, another king, Xerxes II, ruled for a mere 45 days before being assassinated by his half-brother, who was then killed by another half-brother, Darius II. This constant infighting weakened the central authority of the great king. It sent a clear message to the empire's subjects. The heart of the empire was sick, and the hand holding the scepter was beginning to tremble. While the king was busy watching his back, who was watching the vast frontiers of the empire? The answer, increasingly, was no one. The internal power struggles in the capital created a power vacuum in the provinces. This was a golden opportunity for ambitious satraps, the provincial governors, to test the limits of their own power. Many of these satraps ruled vast, wealthy territories and commanded their own armies. They began to act less like appointed officials and more like independent kings. They minted their own coins, conducted their own foreign policy, and, when they felt bold enough, openly rebelled against the throne. Revolts by powerful satraps, especially in the western region of Anatolia, became a persistent headache for the Achaemenid kings. These weren't just minor uprisings. They were serious challenges to the empire's integrity. The Great Satraps' Revolt in the 4th century BC saw a coalition of governors join forces to challenge the king's authority. While these rebellions were eventually crushed, they drained the imperial treasury and diverted military resources that were needed elsewhere. It was a constant, exhausting game of whack-a-mole. Every time the king stamped out one rebellion, another would pop up somewhere else. The unity that Darius the Great had worked so hard to forge was beginning to fray at the edges. And no province was more rebellious, more persistent in its desire for freedom than Egypt. The land of the pharaohs had been a jewel in the Persian crown, but it had never truly accepted foreign rule. The Egyptians, with their millennia-old civilization and fierce sense of identity, saw the Persians as occupiers. Throughout this period, Egypt was in a near-constant state of rebellion. They successfully broke away from the empire for several decades, restoring their native pharaohs and forcing the Achaemenid kings to launch massive, costly campaigns to reconquer the valuable province. The struggle for Egypt was a bleeding wound for the empire, a symbol of its struggle to maintain control over its diverse and often unwilling subjects. But perhaps the most revealing event of this era, the one that truly exposed the empire's weakness to its enemies, was an incredible story known as the March of the 10,000. It sounds like something out of a Hollywood epic, and honestly, it's just as dramatic. In 401 BC, a young Persian prince named Cyrus the Younger decided to seize the throne from his older brother, King Artaxerxes II. To bolster his army, Cyrus did something clever. He hired a massive force of about 13,000 elite Greek mercenaries, known as hoplites. He told them they were just going to fight some local rebels, hiding his true objective. These Greek soldiers, hardened veterans of the Peloponnesian War, marched deep into the heart of the Persian Empire, all the way to Babylonia. There, at the Battle of Cunaxa, Cyrus charged recklessly towards his brother and was killed. Suddenly, the 10,000 Greeks found themselves leaderless, thousands of miles from home, and surrounded by hostile territory and a massive Persian army. Everyone expected them to be annihilated. But what happened next shocked the ancient world. The Persians, instead of crushing them, tricked the Greek commanders into a peace conference and then treacherously murdered them. Now truly alone and without leaders, the Greeks refused to surrender. They elected new generals from their own ranks, including an Athenian named Xenophon, who would later write a breathtaking account of their journey called the Anabasis. In an incredible feat of courage, discipline, and endurance, the 10,000 fought their way north, marching for months through rugged mountains and hostile lands, all the way to the Black Sea and eventually back to Greece. They battled Persian forces, weathered freezing winters, and outsmarted their enemies at every turn. The story of their survival was more than just an adventure tale. It was a revelation. For the Greek world, it was proof that the mighty Persian Empire was not invincible. A small, disciplined army of Greek soldiers had marched right through its heart and lived to tell the tale. They had seen firsthand that the empire's vast armies were often poorly motivated and that its internal control was weak. The Anabasis became a bestseller in Greece, and its message was clear. Persia was a colossus with feet of clay. It was vast and rich, but it was also vulnerable. This knowledge would plant a seed in the minds of Greek military thinkers, a seed of an idea that one day a unified Greek army could do more than just march through Persia, it could conquer it. That seed would eventually blossom in the mind of a young Macedonian prince named Alexander. And that is where we will leave our story for today. The long peace was anything but peaceful. It was an era of internal decay, where palace intrigue, rebellious provinces, and the daring march of the 10,000 exposed deep-seated vulnerabilities within the Achaemenid Empire. The stage was being set for a final, dramatic confrontation that would change the course of history forever. We saw the mighty Persian Empire grapple with internal strife and external threats. But today, a storm is gathering on the western horizon, one that will change the face of the ancient world forever. This is the story of the conqueror from Macedon. For centuries, the Greek city-states were a fractured, bickering collection of rivals. That all changed with one man, Philip II of Macedon. From the rugged north of Greece, Philip forged a kingdom and, more importantly, an army unlike any the world had seen. He took the traditional Greek phalanx, a wall of shields and spears, and perfected it. He lengthened the spears into the formidable sarissa, created specialized cavalry units, and drilled his soldiers into a disciplined, professional fighting force. For the first time, Greece was united, not by diplomacy, but by the sword of Macedon. The stage was set, but the lead actor was yet to make his entrance. Philip's ambition was to lead this new, unified Greek army against their age-old adversary, the Persian Empire. But fate had other plans. Philip was assassinated, and the throne passed to his son, a young man barely 20 years old. A man whose name would echo through eternity, Alexander. Some in Greece and Persia saw a boy on the throne and thought Macedon's power would crumble. They couldn't have been more wrong. Alexander didn't just inherit his father's army. He inherited his father's dream and magnified it 100-fold. In 334 BC, he crossed the Hellespont into Asia with an army of around 40,000 men. It was a gamble of epic proportions, an invasion of a superpower by a fledgling kingdom. This wasn't just a war. It was a collision of worlds. The Persian king, Darius III, was the ruler of a vast and wealthy empire, stretching from Egypt to India. He initially underestimated this Macedonian upstart. His local governors were tasked with swatting Alexander away like a fly. Their first attempt came at the Granicus River. The Persians held the high ground on the opposite bank, a strong defensive position. Any conventional general would have hesitated. But Alexander was not conventional. He led his elite companion cavalry in a direct, audacious charge straight across the river and up the muddy banks, crashing into the Persian lines. The shock of his attack was overwhelming. The Persian front broke, and the first victory belonged to Alexander. It was a stunning announcement of his arrival. News of the defeat at Granicus sent a shockwave through the Persian court. Darius III realized this was no mere border raid. He decided to take personal command of the army. He gathered a massive force, vastly outnumbering Alexander's, and marched to confront him at a narrow coastal plain near the town of Issus. The terrain was Darius's undoing. The narrow battlefield prevented him from using his superior numbers to envelop the Macedonians. It became a brutal, head-on clash. In the heart of the battle, Alexander spotted Darius himself, towering in his war chariot. Once again, Alexander led a charge aimed directly at the heart of the enemy command. As the Macedonian cavalry surged towards him, panic seized Darius. He fled the battlefield, leaving his army to collapse into chaos. In a stunning turn of events, Alexander even captured the Persian royal camp, including Darius's mother, wife, and children. He treated them with the utmost respect, a gesture that signaled he wasn't just a conqueror, but a potential king. After Issus, the great coastal cities of the Levantine, Sidon, Gaza fell to Alexander, some after long and brutal sieges. Egypt, tired of Persian rule, welcomed him as a liberator, proclaiming him pharaoh, but the war wasn't over. Darius, having escaped from Issus, was not yet beaten. He spent the next 2 years gathering another, even larger army from the eastern provinces of his empire. He chose his ground carefully this time, a wide, flat plain at Gaugamela, near modern-day Mosul in Iraq. This time, there would be no narrow passes to help the Macedonians. Here, Darius's scythed chariots and immense numbers could be brought to bear. This was the final showdown, the battle for the world. On the plains of Gaugamela, Alexander faced an army that may have numbered over 200,000 men. The Persian line stretched for miles. Any lesser commander would have been paralyzed by fear. Alexander, however, saw an opportunity. He advanced his army at an angle, drawing the Persian left wing out to try and envelop him. This deliberate, risky maneuver stretched the Persian front line, creating a tiny gap near the center, right where Darius III commanded his personal guard. That was the moment Alexander had been waiting for. Just as he did at Issus, he formed his elite cavalry into a wedge and led a thunderous charge directly at that gap, a spear point aimed at the heart of the Persian king. The story repeated itself. Faced with Alexander's terrifying, seemingly unstoppable charge, Darius III lost his nerve and fled for a second time. His flight shattered the morale of the entire Persian army. The battle turned into a rout, a catastrophic defeat from which the Achaemenid Empire would never recover. Gaugamela wasn't just a victory, it was the end of an era. With Darius on the run and his army shattered, the legendary cities of the Persian Empire lay open. Babylon, the ancient jewel of Mesopotamia, opened its gates without a fight. Susa, the administrative capital, yielded its immense treasury to Alexander, instantly making him the richest man in the world. Finally, he marched to Persepolis, the ceremonial and spiritual heart of the Achaemenid dynasty. For generations, this magnificent city, with its grand palaces and soaring columns, had symbolized Persian power. What happened next is one of history's great tragedies. After a period of feasting and celebration, the great palace of Persepolis was set ablaze. Ancient sources are divided on why. Was it a drunken accident during a wild party? Or was it a deliberate act of policy? A symbolic revenge for the Persian burning of Athens over a century earlier, signaling to the world that the Achaemenid dynasty was well and truly over. Whatever the reason, the magnificent city was reduced to ruins, its destruction marking a dramatic and violent end to Persian glory. While Alexander consolidated his new empire, Darius III was a fugitive in his own lands, fleeing eastward into the remote provinces. His authority had evaporated. His own nobles and generals saw him as a failure, a king who had twice fled from the battlefield. Near modern-day Tehran, a group of his own satraps, led by a man named Bessus, betrayed him. They arrested Darius, intending to hand him over to Alexander to curry favor. But as Alexander's vanguard closed in, the conspirators panicked. They stabbed Darius and left him to die by the side of the road. A Macedonian soldier found the great king of Persia, ruler of the known world, bleeding out in a cart. By the time Alexander arrived, Darius III was dead. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, which had endured for over 2 centuries, was officially over. It had not crumbled from within. It had been decisively and swiftly conquered. The empire now belonged to Alexander. But his story, and the story of the new world he would create, was far from finished. The rise of Alexander is one of history's most incredible tales, and we've only just scratched the surface.